Hi there, hope you're all doing well. This week I get some more practice in with non-metallic metal using this Vampiric Undead Barbarian for Age of Fantasy quest. I went for her for a couple of reasons, the main one being there's a decent variety of metal surfaces that allows me to practice with more methods at the same time. The second is this was released at the start of the month and will allow me to enter the painting contest, because what better way to practice new techniques than to enter it into a contest at the end of the week. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. You can also join Discord where you can share anything you have been hobbying on, or just come and hang out. Now that is enough rambling, I hope you enjoyed the video and find it useful. To start off this paint job, I primed her black and used burnt umber to get a couple of different areas base coated. Since I'm doing non-metallic metal gold, all of these parts get a base coat of this as well, just for the deepest shadow. The second area I'm base coating is all of the leather parts that we'll be painting first. After I finished off the base coat, I mixed in some bootstrap brown and started bringing up the mid-tone on all of the leather parts. I keep this paint fairly thin so I can build it up in layers slowly, focusing more and more to the left side of the mini where the bulk of the light is coming from. These layers of mid-tone are then followed up with a highlight of pure bootstrap brown. The majority of this highlight is over the left side of the raised parts, although I do a little bit on the right side just for the sharper edges. Moving on to her trousers and hair, I start off with a few coats of reddish grey. With this being a relatively light colour, it does take a few coats to get full coverage, but it isn't that important on the hair, but the trousers need to be bright to fit in with the rest of my army. After giving it a couple of coats, I moved on to the first of the highlights with warm grey. For the trousers, this goes over almost everything again. I just leave that reddish grey in the deeper recesses and the edges where other materials meet. On her hair, I left it with a lot more of the reddish grey on show. This is more some variation rather than a highlight. Although saying that, I still focused around the top of these strands and left these shadows as they were. Giving these parts more of a highlight now, I grabbed Grimy Grey. This is to bring up any areas in the light on the trousers. For her hair, this is across the edges of these strands and almost entirely on the top of the head. Now getting started on the skin, I went with a base coat of Decadent Purple. This is because my Vampiric Undead army all have purple skin, or at least the 4 others I have painted. The rest of the army is still on my pile of potential. Although comparing her to the other minis, she is a lot brighter than them in the end, but I think her skin comes out better than theirs anyway, and I'll probably use this more often. After a couple of coats of this, I moved on to getting the mid-tone done. I mixed in some Elfic Flesh, which is a warm white tone. I went for a warm tone on top of this colder base coat just to get some temperature contrast and keep a little bit of life in the skin. I went through a couple of these mixing, adding a little extra Elfic Flesh for the second time around and focusing more towards the top of the mini. This is then finished up with pure Elfic Flesh just over the very tops and the sharper edges on the face. Also, before moving on to the next step, it's worth mentioning I left the eyes black as I tried my best not to get any paint onto them so that I can use this as a shadow when I come back in later and dot them in. Before doing some of these smaller details around the mini, however, I get started on the silver non-metallic metal with a base coat of Doom Death Black. I could have left this as the primer colour, but I'm going to be futzing around with this a lot just to try and get some decent blends, and having a black that I can replicate easily makes a lot more sense. Now to start bringing in the next few steps up in contrast, I mixed in some English Grey. The first mixture covers almost the entire area, just leaving that black on the edges and the underside of those panels. The second mix adds a little bit more English Grey and covers around 2/3 of the area I just painted, keeping it thin so that it just blends a little bit smoother. Once I get to the midpoint on the blades, I switch over to pure English Grey, still keeping it thin and just working smaller and smaller in the areas towards the highlight. To start bringing up a brighter highlight now, I mixed about 50-50 English Grey and Blue Grey, covering the very tiny area but still being thin enough that I can blend it with that English Grey part. After a lot of back and forth fussing to get these smoother blends and look really more natural on that blade, I used pure Blue Grey and just go along the very edges where the brightest highlight will be. Since I had this out, I also went across the edge of the blade just to finish it off and make it look sharp. I did highlight on the inner edge of the blade as well, but didn't like that as much, so I ended up glazing over that with English Grey just to darken it back down but not hide it entirely. With the silver done now, I can move on to the turquoise armor, which starts off with a base coat of deep azure fanatic paint. This is my first time using the new army painter range and it's not too bad. It's definitely a step up from the original war paints that I started off with when I got back into painting. I will probably be purchasing more of these in the future, just because they have a decent range of colours and I have a lot of space on my paint rack that needs to be filled with something. With the base coat now finished, I mixed in some aquamarine and started working my way towards the brightest highlight, the same way I did with the silver. Whether I have a lot less experience painting non-metallic armour, I think it shows in the end, as the light values aren't really placed where I think they should be. After getting a couple of these mixed in and working my way up to about halfway, I switched to pure aquamarine and start highlighting process towards the centre of the highlights. Mixed in a little marine mist as I get closer and closer. All of these colours are part of the turquoise range for Fnatic paints, but lends to why they go so well together. This range could do with a darker tone since Deep Azure is actually the darkest in the set, but I can forgive that since Mist Blue is considerably brighter and almost an off-white, which makes it perfect for doing these small centre highlights on these parts. Now that the turquoise is all finished off, I can get back to something I'm more comfortable with, that being the gold non-metallic trim and iconography. Since this was already base coated with burnt umber, I moved straight into the thinned down British khaki, covering a fairly large chunk of the gold. The next step up on this is a mixture of British khaki and golden brown, covering a smaller area and making my way towards the brightest highlight, which after this step is just pure golden brown, and about 50% of the shine. I seem to take less steps with the gold for some reason. I think this is because I'm working with so thin until I get past the golden brown step anyway, where I then mixed in some pale yellow just to start bringing up towards the brightest part. This pale yellow covers really well though, even thinned down, which doesn't make any sense to me since it's a yellow paint and that's known for not covering very well. But this makes it perfect for the final highlight on the brightest parts, as it only takes a couple of coats to get to where I want it to be. That is the bulk of the mini finished. I just have some small details and the base to do now. Getting the details out of the way, I used Hellspawn Red to dot in the eyes, making sure to leave that black around the edges for the depth. Since I missed the blood drop on the belt buckle, this also gets done with the red just for a little bit of contrast to that turquoise. This is the mini complete and it's just the base to get done now, which I grabbed reddish grey to get these slabs base coated and separated from that muddy ground. While this is still a little wet, I went over these slabs with English grey, not aiming for full coverage, I just want some variation on them. To make the edges of these stones stand out, I'll go around with skeleton bone. Since the cracked edges would be dirty and not fresh based on where the environment is meant to be for this base, it's a graveyard and it's going to be dirty. The muddy ground was looking a little bit bland as well, so I went over with burnt umber again and then straight in with British khaki to wet blend them together, just to get that little visual interest into them. Once I thought the base was dry, I used strong tone wash to go over it and darken down all those edges and blend the colours a little bit together. The colours on the mud blended a little bit too well though, because I was impatient and didn't leave it long enough to dry. The easy fix for this though is just wait for it to dry and paint over it again with another wash. That brings the Vampiric Undead Barbarian to an end. I added a few dead grass tufts on the base just to finish it off and use those warm tones to contrast with a lot of the cool tone of the mini. The silver on the axe blades is probably the best non-metallic metal I've actually done so far. As I mentioned earlier, however, the armor could do with some work and I'm going to need to find some more minis with larger armor panels just to practice on. But until then, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. You can also come and hang out in Discord where you can share anything you have been hobbying on, using the link in the description. While in the description, there are a couple of affiliate links for those of you looking to pick up some new minis or just some painting supplies. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you did, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more content. Most importantly though, be kind to each other.